Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm your host, Amanda Lamb. In today's deep dive conversation, we're talking with WRAL multiplatform producer Delaney Eyermann about why North Carolina's animal shelters have the second highest kill rate in the country. In 2022, 14,000 animals were euthanized in shelters here. The shelters took in nearly 120,000 animals. 30,000 were surrendered by their owners, and more than 56,000 were identified as strays. Delaney, welcome to the program.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So a lot of people think of shelters as a place to go to adopt a pet, but this situation kind of casts a dark cloud over the shelters. What did you learn about why so many animals are getting euthanized here in North Carolina?
Yes, so I know the term kill shelter tends to have a really negative connotation when you think of animal shelters, but there are no shelters that want to euthanize animals. The main reason they end up having to euthanize animals is there's just too many animals and not enough resources to take care of all of them.
Yeah, and I know you spoke about this with the director of the Cumberland County Animal Services. Talk about the resources that they need that they don't have and compare that with, what's happening in terms of the animals coming through their doors, the numbers.
Yes. So, like she said when I spoke with her, there's not an unlimited supply of money. There's not an unlimited supply of staff. So they do end up having to manage this overwhelming tide of animals to the best of their abilities. She said they heavily rely on the help of volunteers. So she said there's no way they'd be able to take every single dog for a 30-minute walk twice a day if it weren't for volunteers.
So it's kind of less about the space and more about the employees, about how many people they have to operate these shelters.
I think it's a little bit of both. But I mean, definitely the volunteers make a big impact.
So I know she said, and I know you put in your reporting, that shelters are a last resort for most animals. So for whatever reason, a certain animal has not found a forever home and they're waiting for adoption or to get euthanized. So are there standards about how long these animals are kept by a shelter prior to being put down?
Yeah, so when I spoke with Elaine, the director of Cumberland County Animal Services, she said there's not really a set
time limit.
It's not really, okay, these 3 animals are scheduled to be put down today. It's really dependent on the situation, and it is just, the last possible option.
Right. And I'm sure most people who work in shelters, obviously people who volunteer in shelters, they are animal lovers or they wouldn't do this work. So again, this isn't their goal, but they just seem to not have options because of the number of animals we have here in North Carolina.
Absolutely. When you've got thousands and thousands of animals coming through and only, 20 cages for these animals, you're forced to make those tough decisions.
Absolutely. Well, we'll be back after the break with more from WRAL's Delaney Eyermann about potential solutions to this problem. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm talking with WRAL's Delaney Eyermann about how communities can decrease the number of animals going into the shelters. So I know one kind of belief, I don't know if this is an urban myth, urban legend, but a lot of people believe that the animals who go into the shelters are there because they're aggressive. So what did you find out about that in terms of the types of animals in shelters, and are some of them being euthanized because they just can't be adopted because they have some aggression issues?
I think that can be the case, obviously, but I didn't find that to be true at all. I walked through the entire shelter, put my hand in every single dog's cage, and they were all just the biggest sweethearts. They just wanted to be pet and lick your hand. I didn't see any signs of aggression from any of them, and if they do exhibit signs of aggression, the shelter is required to let you know. Unfortunately, there are some dogs out there who just are not safe to be around people for whatever reason, whether it's a traumatic history or a mental illness. Sometimes dogs do need to be put down because of aggression, but that's rare.
That's not the overwhelming reason that the dogs are put down. It's
Right.
obviously the resources and that's just, I'm sure, really difficult for the people who work there. And I know you mentioned volunteers are there helping care for the animals. Are they kind of actively seeking new volunteers all the time to help?
Oh, I'm sure. I didn't speak directly with Elaine about that, but I think with like most nonprofits, they'll take any volunteers they can get.
And, we hear all the time, spay and neuter your pets, spay and neuter your pets. But that takes money. It takes money to care for a pet. It takes money to feed a pet. It takes money to take a dog or a cat to the vet. So there's a financial barrier, I would imagine, to a lot of people, and they think they can handle it, and then maybe they get a pet and decide, I just don't have the means to do this. Is that what some of the shelters are hearing?
That is definitely the case. Sometimes pets are expensive, and especially with, when COVID was happening and now the economy's not doing super well, a lot of people have fallen on hard times, and generally pets are kind of the first expenses that get cut in those situations. So, if you can't afford to have a pet, you need to be responsible and not adopt one. But if it is a case where
You've already done it, yes.
And you no longer are able to afford that pet, you should be responsible and try to rehome that pet yourself.
And I thought you had some really good sources in your article online about rehoming pets. You don't have to go to the shelter. There are organizations. Tell me about that.
Oh my gosh, there are so many websites out there. There's an endless number of Facebook groups specifically for rehoming pets. So, it can be overwhelming to know where to start when you've never
done that
before, but it's so simple. It should be quick, it should be easy, and you should hopefully be able to find your pet a safe home without them ending up in a shelter.
And there are organizations that deal with specific breeds too. So you can find a group that maybe specializes in a certain type of dog and rehoming a certain type of dog. Any indication why we have such a problem here? Is it just that we are somewhat of a rural state and we just have a lot of animals?
I'm sure that could be a factor. I wasn't really able to find
anything definitive
on exactly why we have the second highest kill rate, but I do know the stray population, like anywhere, is a huge issue.
It's very high. Right. And so that goes to my last question. Main thing that they said over and over, I would imagine when you talk to them, is just do not let a pet loose. First of all, it's just irresponsible for the pet and the community, but that is the wrong way to handle this situation.
Yeah, that's called dumping. You might have heard that phrase. It's become a little more popular. It's when people just abandon their pet, usually in an isolated area, usually at an hour where people aren't really awake yet. And I get that it might be the quick fix, but domesticated animals are not
suited
to survive in the wild. So.
Right, absolutely. And so it sounds like there's a lot of things we as a community can do to try to help this problem. On one hand, you can volunteer, and on the other hand, you can just be a responsible pet owner.
I think that's it. Just be a responsible pet owner. I know you were making fun of it a little bit, but spay and neuter your pets.
Right.
Chip your pets. No one thinks their pet is going to get lost, but they do all the time. And it's so much more difficult to find your pet if they're not chipped. So
many different tips there. Thank you so much, Delaney, for shedding light on this important issue. You have given us a lot to think about today. And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and making us part of your morning routine. If you like what you're hearing, please rate us on Apple Podcasts or on whatever podcast app you use. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email waiting in your inbox every morning with Triangle news events and headlines to get you ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.